Well, hey, Soundside Church, Pastor Aaron coming to you here tonight with your community group in particular. And tonight is the last night that we are looking at the book of Joshua. So tonight we're going to ask you to read some passages from Joshua chapter 23 and Joshua chapter 24, and maybe just a little bonus passage after that. But tonight, here's my last opportunity to act as your video tour guide as we look at this magnificent book and this fascinating character and the courage to stand. And tonight what we're going to see is a little bit of completing the circle, if you will. And we're going to look at that in four separate ways. In some of these, it really is going to be the circle is complete. In other of these, it's going to be more like the circle's complete, we're going to go around again. So let me tell you what I'm talking about. In Joshua chapter 23, we read that everything is settled. Joshua is old, the war is over, the land is settled, and Joshua gathers all the people together. And in verse 6, he says, "Therefore, be very strong to keep and do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses." And I find it so interesting that these are the words that God used to him at the very start of the book of Joshua when he says, "Moses, my servant, is dead. You, Joshua, be strong and courageous. Meditate on my words so that you can make sure that you can do it so that you will have good success." And Joshua did have good success. And now he looks at the next generation of people and he says, "I'm old. I'm at the end of my life. What God said to me, I now say to you, be strong." But it's a bit of a shift. This is the circle is complete. The conquest of Canaan and the settlement of the land is over. And now the mission shifts from advancing to standing, from conquest to occupation. The idea is victory has been won. Now make sure you don't lose what God has won for you. And you're going to look a little bit about what that means, because it's really important that they recognize that they didn't win it for themselves. God won it for them. But what an application for us, that God has given us so much, and we have got to be so careful as we occupy this life, that we don't forfeit so many of the blessings that God has purchased for us. Well, that's chapter 23. Joshua is basically just kind of saying, hey guys, make sure you continue to follow the Lord. But in Joshua chapter 24, Joshua gathers the people again to Shechem. And I don't know if you remember where Shechem is, but Shechem was the town that they visited after defeating Ai, before doing the northern and southern campaign in the conquest of Canaan, because it was there that they read out the blessings of the law and the curses of the law, and they vowed to follow God. And so Joshua brings them back to that place where the blessings and the cursings of the law were established, and he reminds the people what God has called them to do. And he says, I don't care what you guys do. If you don't think you should follow Yahweh, don't. But for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And the people said, we're going to serve the Lord. And Joshua wrestles with them just a little bit, but he has them witness that whatever that covenant was, they're going to continue to abide by that covenant. And so they kind of come back to Shechem. Shechem kind of marked the beginning of the real invasion of the land. And now that it's all settled and the people have their settlements and their towns and their villages and their territories, now they come back to Shechem to kind of renew that covenant that as Joshua's leaving us now, we're going to stay faithful to the Lord. Well, as we talk about these circles being completed, the end of Joshua chapter 24 introduces us to some interesting thoughts that I want to share with you here. And I'm going to read these verses. This is verse 29. After these things, Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. And they buried him in his own inheritance at Timnath-Serah, which is in the hill country of Ephraim, north of the mountain of Gaash. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua, and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua and had known all the work that the Lord did for Israel. The very next paragraph tells us that they actually brought the bones of Joseph and buried them at Shechem, in a piece of land that Joseph's father Jacob had purchased. And that is what is so interesting, because another circle is being completed. And it's a circle that we find in Genesis chapter 50 at the end of Joseph's life. Now, if you're not familiar with this, understand that God made the covenant with Abraham, that God was going to bless all the nations through him and make a nation out of him. And that's the nation that has now settled in the land of Canaan. God's covenant with Abraham is in the process of being fulfilled. But Abraham had a son named Isaac. Isaac had a son named Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons, and one of them, Joseph, went down to Egypt, where he was able to preserve the life of his family that would one day become the nation of Israel. And at the end of his life, he told his family, he said, the Bible says here that Joseph lived 110 years, and Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Joseph made the sons of Israel swear that they would carry his bones to that land. And so here at the end of the book of Joshua, we find that they finally bury the bones of Joseph. I don't think it's a mistake that God has recorded that Joseph lived 110 years and Joshua lived 110 years. There's a poetry to that. There's a rhythm to that. There's almost this signal that says this story that God began way back in the book of Genesis is finally coming to completion. As Joshua said, you all know, not one word that God said has failed. You can continue to trust him. But we do find the last verses of the book of Joshua tell us something else. Eleazar, the son of Aaron, died. They buried him at Gibeah, the town of Phinehas, his son, which had been given him in the hill country of Ephraim. You say, what's the big deal there? Because a generation is passing off the scene. Joshua was Moses' successor. Eleazar was Aaron's successor. The leader of the nation, the king figure, if you will, and the priest have both passed off the scene. Israel now needs a new leader, and they need a new high priest. And the question is, without this Mosaic generation of leadership and priesthood, who's going to lead the people forward into the future? Will they have a king? Will they have a priest? And who's going to make sure that they continue to follow that covenant? You're going to find out what that looked like through a passage I'm going to have you read in your community group. But I want to point out that the Bible is setting into motion a question that has to be answered. Who is our priest? Who is our king? We can't fulfill the terms of the covenant on our own. Who's going to do it for us? And of course, that question is ultimately going to be answered much, much later in the person of Jesus Christ, who becomes our king, our substitute, our interceding high priest. And Joshua actually sets that up with the last words saying that the high priest also was gone. Israel would need a replacement, and God's redemptive program to use the nation of Israel as his means of bringing salvation into the world was about to enter a new phase. And the question would be, not will they conquer Canaan, but now that God has given them everything he's promised, will they remain faithful to him so that his blessings can flow? I think you probably already know what the answer to that is, but I'm going to point it out to you in your discussion time. I'm going to turn it over to your community group leader. I do hope that our time in the book of Joshua has been helpful. Joshua had the courage to stand because he trusted in God, and God fulfilled everything that he ever promised that Joshua would accomplish. And I believe that if we remain faithful to God, we will see untold blessings in our lives as God gives us the courage to stand in the time that he's called us to stand in. Well, thank you so much, Soundside, for joining us in these community groups. Like I said, hope it was a blessing, and I'm turning it over to your community group leader now.